Forget what you think you know about high-profile political assassinations. We are diving into a story where, honestly, the facts are just the starting point.
That's right.
We are going to put on our investigative hats today. We're looking at how one single tragic event immediately sparked one of the most intense political and, frankly, cultural narrative wars in recent American history.
Yeah, the fallout from Charlie Kirk's assassination at Utah Valley University, it fundamentally reshaped the landscape of American political debate. It really did. It created this fierce battleground over free speech, the media, and, what's even considered acceptable discourse anymore.
And we're going to give you the tools straight from the source material we've gathered to really analyze the core event itself. We want you to help decode the potential underlying motives and understand this, well, unprecedented crackdown on dissent that followed almost immediately.
We've got some explosive details here, things about the January 6th money trail, a really shocking pivot towards a kind of weaponized Christian nationalism, and some, frankly, jaw-dropping specifics about censorship threats that reach the very highest levels of the U.S. government.
And you, listening right now, you are absolutely essential to this deep dive. Our mission here with KaiZen is to help transform you into the sharpest analyst in the room. We want you capable of dissecting these huge seismic events.
Exactly. In this deep dive brought to you by KaiZen, we promise we'll help you dissect the media narrative, really understand the implications of political funding, where the money comes from, where it goes, and learn how to analyze events like a seasoned investigator.
So before we jump in, if you believe that understanding the real mechanisms of power, and yes, censorship, is critical knowledge for staying informed in our world today, just do this. Right now in the comments. Let's make this a truly global and enduring conversation.
Yeah, let's do it. We want you engaged every step of the way.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's start with the hard facts. The event itself.
Sure.
Because the setting, the timing, they tell a story all on their own, don't they?
They really do. So the assassination happened on September 10th, 2025. Kirk was on the road, kicking off his American comeback tour. And Utah Valley University, UVU, that was the very first stop of the season.
And choosing a public university campus, that location itself proved tragically significant.
Absolutely.
And the physical setting, you really need to picture this.
Yeah.
He wasn't inside some heavily secured auditorium, right?
No, not at all. He was speaking under a large tent pitched out on a grassy amphitheater, and he was doing his famous, prove me wrong, setup. The table, the sign.
That classic setup.
Yeah.
And it drew a huge crowd. Sources say approximately 3,000 people were there. But here's the thing that jumps out. Despite his high profile, despite that massive crowd, the logistics seemed, well, strikingly casual.
That's the detail that really leaps out from the sources, yeah.
Yeah.
The event was ticketed, sure, but apparently those tickets weren't really enforced, so security couldn't accurately vet who was actually coming in.
Right.
And maybe most critically, it's especially given the topics he usually covered and the, charged environment of campus politics, metal detectors were not used for entry.
No metal detectors. For a figure like Charlie Kirk, who generated both massive enthusiasm and, let's be honest, intense targeted opposition, that security posture seems, well, profoundly lacking.
It raises serious questions, definitely.
And the final moments before the shot, they're also very telling about the political context. Reports indicate Kirk was actually debating the issue of gun violence.
Right.
And he had just finished answering a specific question about the narrative around transgender mass shooters. Seconds after he finished that answer, the fatal shot was fired.
So this wasn't random. This wasn't just some, stray incident. The violence appears rooted directly in the kind of hyper-polarized discourse that Kirk himself was known for driving.
Exactly. And the FBI confirmed this almost immediately. Special Agent in Charge Robert Bowles explicitly called it a targeted event. They weren't treating it as random from the get-go.
Okay, so let's pivot then to the man accused, Tyler Robinson. He's 22 years old. And importantly, he wasn't a student at UVU. He lived elsewhere in Utah, down in Washington County.
Right.
And the narrative surrounding his background, it immediately gets complex, which is, I think, really crucial for our analytical framework here. We can't just paint him with one brush.
That complexity is exactly why the media struggled to create a simple, clean picture, wasn't it? On one hand, sources say he was familiar with firearms from a young age. There were childhood photos of the Robinson family on shooting trips, attending weapon displays.
Right, that's one side. But then his more recent political and personal evolutions seem to be in direct opposition to Kirk's platform. His own mother told investigators that Robinson had become more pro-gay and pro-trans rights-oriented over the last year or so.
And he had no criminal record. Zero. So this doesn't look like some long-term radical simmering for years. It looks more like maybe a sudden violent reaction from someone who's developing identity, whose political consciousness just stood in stark contrast to the rhetoric Kirk was famous for.
And perhaps the clearest indication of motive we have comes from a text message. Robinson apparently texted his partner right after the shooting. Prosecutors noted he said he had enough of Kirk's hatred.
Had enough.
That contradiction, though, the familiarity with guns versus the passionate defense of marginalized groups that Kirk often targeted, it really complicates any easy narrative about political radicalization, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
If you, listening right now, find this contradictory profile of the suspect compelling, just type CompX in the comments. Let us know you see that nuance.
Yeah, it's definitely not straightforward. Okay, so moving to Charlie Kirk himself, his identity was just inseparable from the political machinery he built, right?
He was the co-founder and CEO of Turning Point USA, TPUSA, that's the 501c nonprofit arm. And then there's its more aggressive political sibling, Turning Point Action, or TPA, the 501c4.
And he wasn't just some commentator. He was a major figure, described often as a kingmaker, a driving force in Donald Trump's campaigns, largely because he was so successful at mobilizing young conservatives. That was his niche.
But that rapid rise, it was fueled by rhetoric that was consistently controversial. I mean, arguably designed to provoke.
Yeah, and for you listening to understand the depth of the antagonism, the environment that led to this event, we really have to briefly review the core tenets of his platform, as reported in our sources. It's crucial context.
Absolutely. Kirk promoted this vision of America First education, but it was coupled with these deeply polarizing social views, some of his most criticized stances. While strong opposition to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, he often argued it was unnecessary government overreach.
He also vocally promoted the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. That's the racist idea that white people are deliberately being replaced by non-white immigrants. An ideology unfortunately frequently linked to domestic extremism.
And his stance on abortion was equally hardline. Sources confirm he was strongly opposed, arguing against exceptions even for child rape victims as young as 10 years old.
Wow.
And critically, especially given how he died, he argued that gun deaths are essentially a worthwhile cost to protect the Second Amendment. His position was that protecting the right to bear arms had to supersede concerns about mass shootings.
That kind of rhetoric, it obviously made him a target for criticism, but let's be clear, it also made him a hero to millions of his followers.
Absolutely. Which brings us to the shift from just the messaging to the political infrastructure, the machine, and crucially, the money trail. This connection isn't just interesting, it's central to understanding his actual role in the political machine and why the response to his death was so immediate, so organized.
Right.
We have to talk about Kirk's explicit connections to January 6th, 2021.
Okay, this is where it gets really relevant for you, the engaged citizen listening right now. During the House Select Committee's investigation into the January 6th attack, Charlie Kirk, who commanded this enormous political platform, he invoked the Fifth Amendment.
Yep, the right against self-incrimination.
Exactly. He refused to answer questions on several key topics. Now, invoking the Fifth isn't an admission of guilt, legally speaking, but it is a legal shield used when testimony might expose the witness to criminal prosecution.
And the specific things he refused to answer about are extremely pointed. He wouldn't answer questions about TPUSA's direct involvement in planning the January 6th protests.
Planning, not just attending, but planning.
Right. He refused to answer if he personally wrote, "I am invoking my Fifth Amendment right," in response to an email thread that was discussing a massive payment related to the protest buildup.
A massive payment. We'll get to that.
And maybe most damningly, politically speaking, he refused to state whether he believed President Trump incited the violence that actually unfolded at the Capitol that day.
Just think about that for a second. Here's a man who built his entire brand on fearless, open debate, prove me wrong, truth-telling. And he refused, under oath, to speak about his role in events linked to an attempt to disrupt the U.S. government and the violence that followed.
It definitely complicates the narrative that emerged after his death, the narrative of him being purely a martyr for free speech.
Absolutely.
And we have the paper trail to back this up. Documents reviewed by the committee showed a specific invoice. It was made out to Turning Point Action, Kirk's 501c political arm, requesting a payment of, get this, $211,931.33.
Wow, that's specific.
Very specific. And the invoice was explicitly for the January 6th build-out. That's pretty clear evidence of financial involvement in the logistics, the planning of the events leading up to the Capitol breach.
And there's more money, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. Additionally, Kirk's organizations received a staggering $1.25 million from Julie Fancelli, the Publix heiress.
$1.25 million.
Right. And this money was explicitly earmarked to fund buses, a significant number of buses, presumably, to transport supporters to the January 6th events in Washington, D.C.
So directly funding the transport of people to the event.
Exactly. Now, a spokesman later tried to kind of downplay the number of buses actually sent, but the sheer size of that payment, $1.25 million, it clearly signals the intended scale of the operation TPA was supposed to execute.
Okay, so when you connect these dots, invoking the fifth on planning and payments, alongside clear documents showing substantial funds for Jan 6 logistics, you realize Kirk wasn't just a talking head on college campuses.
Not at all. He was a deeply integrated, financially powerful operative in the events surrounding the Capitol attack. And understanding this background, this financial and organizational muscle, is really the only way to truly grasp the ferocity and maybe the calculation of the political response that followed his death.
Yeah, that context is everything. If that connection between the campus debate circuit and the, well, insurrection planning surprised you, maybe take a moment now and share this deep dive with someone you know who needs to understand the full complexity of this figure. Don't let them just see the headlines.
Okay, so the assassination happens, and it was immediately seized upon, weaponized, really.
Yeah.
It triggered this coordinated top-down campaign against political speech and dissent. And the sources we looked at actually compare it to historical moments of government coercion, things like McCarthyism.
Right, let's unpack this crucial narrative shift because it needs context. We have data, right, compiled by reputable sources like the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And it shows that for decades, actually, right-wing, ideologically motivated homicides have significantly outpaced those from the left.
That's correct.
And more recently, the data show that between 2022 and 2024, all 61 known political killings in the U.S. were attributed to right-wing extremists. All of them.
Yeah, that data exists, yet the narrative immediately pivoted away from that reality after Kirk's death.
Instantly. President Trump immediately blamed, quote, the radical left group of lunatics. He asserted that leftist political rhetoric was directly responsible for Kirk's death. He even vowed to, quote, get that problem solved.
So that official declaration, completely ignoring the data on domestic extremism, it basically provided the ideological cover, the justification for the crackdown that followed.
And the rhetoric from other government officials, it wasn't just talk. It became a direct instruction for political surveillance almost.
Yeah.
Vice President J.D. Vance, he took over Kirk's podcast almost immediately after the assassination.
Yeah, I remember that.
He called for the wholesale dismantling of progressive political organizations. He specifically named groups like George Soros's Open Society Foundations. But the truly shocking part was his direct instruction to citizens.
That's right. Vance explicitly told Americans, told you listening potentially, to report any uncivil speech about Kirk, even stuff seen on social media, report it to employers, report it to authorities. And the clear goal, he stated, was to have the speakers terminated from their jobs.
Terminated. That's not just expressing disapproval. That's the government endorsing a political purge, essentially outsourcing ideological enforcement to private citizens and HR departments across the country.
And that directive, it had immediate consequences. It spurred vigilante action online. Organized conservative groups started flagging thousands of individuals, people who made comments they decided were celebratory or maybe just critical of Kirk's death.
And critically, these groups often got it wrong, didn't they? They misidentified people, incorrectly targeted individuals.
Absolutely. This doxing campaign led to real-world chaos. We're talking threats, harassment, families having to flee their homes temporarily because they were terrified. We have documented cases like the National Chair of Students for Trump, Ryan Fournier. He had to publicly retract an accusation against a Wisconsin teacher after getting the wrong person. But the damage, was already done by then.
The fear was already sown. Okay, let's talk about the case study that really illuminates the state's direct role in this censorship push, the suspension of Jimmy Kimmel Live.
Right.
Because this wasn't just some network's internal decision. This involved the highest regulatory body for broadcast media in the U.S.
Right. So Kimmel, in his opening monologue after the assassination, He suggested the Majay Gang, as he put it, was trying to characterize the killer as anything other than one of them. He accused them of trying to immediately score political points and manipulate the narrative.
Pretty standard political commentary, arguably.
You could argue that, but the retaliation was immediate and it was powerful. FCC chief Brendan Carr, using his official position, threatened action against ABC, the network. He cited Kimmel's comments as potentially, quote, directly misleading the American public.
And here's the part you, the listener, really need to grasp. Carr explicitly threatened broadcast license revocation for ABC's owned and operated stations.
That's a hammer.
This isn't just a strongly worded tweet. This is a direct regulatory threat that jeopardizes the core profitability, even the existence, of a major media network.
And that's the crucial difference between, say, free market pressure like a boycott and actual government coercion. A broadcast license is a government-granted privilege to use the public airwaves. The FCC threatening to revoke it is the government effectively saying, change your speech, censor your host, or lose your right to operate. It's chilling.
And the threat worked, didn't it?
It appears so. ABC suspended Jimmy Kimmel Live indefinitely just days after that FCC threat became public. Experts, including groups like the ACLU, immediately drew parallels to McCarthyism. They called it an unprecedented crackdown, even beyond McCarthyism because of the naked involvement of a government regulator trying to enforce political conformity on air.
Wow. If you find that regulatory threat against a major network shock, just write license in the comments right now. Let us know that resonated.
And this chilling effect, it wasn't just limited to Hollywood A-listers. It created this massive purge across the American educational system and other parts of the media, too. Our sources detail widespread firings, disciplinary actions.
Yeah, numerous academics, school employees all across the country fired or disciplined for comments deemed callous or inflammatory about Kirk's death. The list includes professors in places like Texas and South Carolina, employees at institutions like Middle Tennessee State University, Ole Miss.
And the scale in Texas alone was staggering. Governor Greg Abbott claimed nearly 300 teachers in Texas were under investigation. 300. That suggests a systemic, top-down directive to root out dissent, doesn't it?
It really does. And students weren't immune either. A Texas Tech student was expelled and arrested for misdemeanor assault after just arguing with another student holding a pro-Kirk sign, and a Texas State student expelled and arrested simply for mocking Kirk's death in a video they posted online.
The reach extended further still. MSNBC fired their analyst Matthew Dowd after he criticized Kirk, calling him a divisive figure pushing hate speech. DC Comics canceled a planned Batman spin-off comic after its writer shared an inflammatory post online.
Even the military got involved. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth explicitly instructed his staff to identify and purge any members of the military or his department who seemed to condone or mock Kirk's death.
So when you put all that together, it confirms this concerted, systematic effort across both private and public sectors to enforce a certain kind of ideological obedience in the immediate aftermath.
But it's important to note, this level of punitive response wasn't monolithic. Even within the conservative movement itself, right, there were fissures.
That's a key analytical point, yes. There was immediate public pushback from some prominent conservative voices.
Like who?
Well, ironically, FCC Chairman Brendan Carr himself, the very regulator who threatened ABC, he spoke out against using Kirk's death as leverage to introduce new hate speech laws. And perhaps more forcefully, the high-profile conservative commentator Tucker Carlson also warned against it.
What did Carlson say?
His warning was pretty stark. He argued that using Kirk's death to trample on the First Amendment and bring in hate speech laws would be unconstitutional. He even suggested it could justify civil disobedience.
So that internal resistance shows that even some on the right saw this political reaction not just as seeking justice, but as a potentially dangerous anti-constitutional overreach, transforming a personal tragedy into an instrument of government censorship.
Exactly. It wasn't a unified front, even if the crackdown itself was widespread.
Okay, let's shift to the memorial service itself. Held at State Farm Stadium, massive venue, it became this profound, almost theological flashpoint, didn't it? It was like a collision between this authentic, personal expression of Christian faith and an immediate, very calculated political demand for vengeance and retribution.
That's a great way to put it, a collision. And the emotional core of that whole event, and really the entire aftermath in many ways, was the address given by Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica Kirk. She's known as a faith-based entrepreneur, a former model and actress.
And her address was incredibly powerful. It started with this raw description, didn't it? Seeing her husband's murdered body. Just devastating.
Absolutely gut-wrenching. But her message immediately pivoted away from personal revenge or anger. She stated, simply but profoundly, "That young man, I forgive him."
Wow.
And she grounded this explicitly in her deep Christian faith. She called the act of forgiveness the absolute core of the gospel message. She urged the massive crowd there, thousands of people, to love our enemies.
And she backed it up with action, didn't she?
She did. She vowed publicly, unequivocally, that she would not seek the death penalty for his killer, Tyler Robinson.
That takes incredible strength. Her faith context is important here too, right? The sources mention the Kirk's practice in Ephesians 5 marriage model.
Yes. That model emphasizes mutual respect within a traditional framework the wife submits, the husband cherishes. Her public act of forgiveness, clearly rooted in this deep spiritual commitment, was described by some evangelical leaders as a powerful spiritual weapon, something that transcends politics. She even specifically cited Psalm 26.1, "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble."
So her message was one of grace, de-escalation, maybe even reconciliation.
It absolutely was. But what followed almost immediately was this highly orchestrated political counterargument, delivered from the very same stage, sometimes just seconds after her tearful address finished.
Who led that counterargument?
Vice President J.D. Vance was the first to openly push back against Erica's sentiment. He argued that society shouldn't ignore it for a fake kumbaya moment. He asserted that evil still walks among us.
So essentially dismissing her forgiveness is politically naive or insufficient.
That's certainly how it came across. It highlighted this massive chasm between an individual's spiritual act of reconciliation and how that act might be viewed or used for state-level political purposes.
And President Trump's statements, they further cemented that political call for vengeance, didn't they?
Oh, completely. While he paid tribute to Kirk, calling him a missionary who supposedly did not hate his opponents, Trump, almost in the same breath, delivered this incredibly clear message to the nation. "I hate my opponents and I don't want the best for them."
I hate my opponents. That statement just entirely undercut the message of forgiveness delivered moments earlier by Kirk's own widow.
Stark contrast. And Trump's use of the service was overtly political throughout. He leveraged the grief-stricken atmosphere to promote the dismantling of progressive groups, just as Vance had. And strategically, he announced new political initiatives, teasing a big announcement about autism research that he was going to hold the next day in the Oval Office.
So the memorial effectively serves as a campaign stop, a political launching pad, using the emotion of the moment.
It certainly had that feel. And other speakers followed that same pattern. Rhetoric saturated with antagonism, not peace. Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller gave a speech described as the most fiery. He spoke not of forgiveness, but of righteous fury. He talked about the necessity of prevailing over forces of wickedness and evil.
And didn't Benny Johnson call it something else entirely?
He did. He explicitly called the event not a funeral, but a revival. And you have to picture the stage itself shielded by tight security, including bulletproof glass for the speakers. It visually represented this high-stakes, antagonistic environment they were cultivating.
That duality really highlights the political co-option of grief and faith, doesn't it? Creating this martyr narrative, almost in real time. Trump declared Kirk immoral, a martyr now for American freedom.
And this politicized grieving, it aligns perfectly with Kirk's own later career shift towards Christian nationalism. You can't really understand the political resonance of this memorial without understanding that movement.
Explain that connection.
Kirk had fully embraced Christian nationalism. He'd co-founded TPUSA Faith, an arm specifically dedicated to engaging pastors, mobilizing religious leaders for political action.
Right, I remember that initiative.
He had personally reversed his own earlier, more secular political stance after reportedly a conversation with a pastor convinced him that America's founding documents derived entirely from the Bible. That ideological framework became central to his political strategy.
And he was linked to the Seven Mountain Mandate idea, too.
Yes, he was a vocal proponent. That's a specific theological framework asserting that evangelical Christians shouldn't retreat from secular society, but must actively seek to dominate 7 key areas of influence: government, media, education, business, family, religion, and entertainment. It's essentially a blueprint for achieving political power and cultural dominance through faith.
So the memorial service itself, part political rally, part altar call, complete with a pastor urging people to stand for Jesus and providing a QR code linking directly to TPUSA faith resources. It was the ultimate practical realization of that Christian nationalist vision.
Precisely. The raw, personal act of forgiveness offered by Erica Kirk, immediately juxtaposed with this overwhelming political demand for vengeance and fury. That stark contrast is what makes this moment so historically crucial for us to analyze.
Yeah. If that stark contrast between forgiveness and fury hits you hard, just write FURY right now in the comments. Let us know you felt that tension.
So what's the primary takeaway from the sources about the future of the movement Kirk built? It seems to be this. The assassination, far from being a crippling blow, actually became the movement's most powerful, almost instantaneous accelerant.
Right. Instead of destroying it, it fueled it. So what does this all mean for Turning Point, the organization Kirk spent a decade building?
Well, the board of TPUSA acted swiftly. They immediately elected Erica Kirk, his widow, as the new CEO.
Interesting move, keeping it within the family, symbolically at least.
And the organization's official statement wasn't just about mourning. It was a direct political challenge. They said, quote, "The attempt to destroy Charlie's work will become our chance to make it more powerful and enduring than ever before."
So leaning right into the martyr narrative to galvanize support.
Exactly. They mobilized that narrative immediately, and the response, according to them, was overwhelming. The organization tweeted about a massive surge in interest. They reported receiving over 62,000 requests from high school and college students across the nation wanting to start or join a TPUSA chapter.
62,000. That's a huge influx. A single event created this massive, quantifiable infusion of new energy, new members into the organization.
It's a staggering number.
And for you, the listener, the learner here, we really need to put TPUSA's financial power into perspective. This isn't some small grassroots club operating on bake sale revenue, is it?
Not even close. TPUSA claims a massive presence, 3,500 campuses nationwide, and its budget. In 2023, the year before the assassination, it reported $85 million in revenue.
$85 million. That level of funding, often coming from diversified donor bases, which allows for long-term programming, endowments, even buying property. It gives TPUSA an enormous, sustained organizational advantage over most progressive youth groups. Many of those groups operate on far smaller budgets, much less consistent funding streams.
And that solid financial infrastructure, it allows them to execute long-term strategies. It's not just about one event or one speaker, it's about building a lasting presence. However, we have to connect this organizational power back to Kirk's own, often highly controversial tactics, especially his preferred style of political engagement.
Right, because he was often praised by his followers as this master debater, but his actual events drew heavy criticism, didn't they?
They did. Rhetoric experts, cited in the sources we reviewed, described his large staged campus events not as genuine debates seeking truth, but as, quote, aggressive, unequal, trolling affairs.
Trolling affairs, meaning?
Meaning, they seemed explicitly designed to provoke distress in the opponent, to shout them down, and maybe most importantly, to create maximally viral video content aimed at humiliating liberals or progressives.
So the goal wasn't really reasoned dialogue or finding common ground.
Critics argued the goal was content creation and political theater. They viewed his format as a mockery of true intellectual discourse, engineered primarily to make the liberal opponent look foolish, flustered, or aggressive on camera.
Which, ironically, sometimes backfired, right? Sometimes it boosted the profiles of the young leftists who managed to own him in these staged debates.
Exactly. It illustrated that self-perpetuating cycle of the digital outrage machine. Conflict drives clicks, regardless of who wins the argument.
And this trolling wasn't just his personal style. It was formalized into organizational policy with the Professor Watch List, wasn't it?
Yes, TPUSA created that notorious list, which publicly named and effectively shamed academics whose views Kirk and the organization disagreed with.
And that had real consequences for people.
Devastating, real-world consequences. It led directly to harassment, threats, intimidation against hundreds of college professors across the country. That specific tactic, creating a public list designed to generate hostility towards individuals based on their expressed views, it fundamentally contradicts the eulogies we heard praising Kirk's commitment to open dialogue and freedom of speech.
Yeah, if you're truly committed to the principle of freedom of expression for everyone, that kind of watch list tactic, it definitely raises serious analytical questions for you, the listener, to consider.
Without a doubt.
Ultimately, then, the assassination of Charlie Kirk seemed to crystallize this massive, high-stakes financial and ideological infrastructure that's been built around youth politics, particularly on the conservative side. The sources clearly demonstrate that groups like TPUSA possess organizational and financial advantages that often dwarf their progressive counterparts.
And those advantages allow them to focus heavily on long-term programming, sustained activism, building that pipeline of young conservatives. The tragic death of Kirk, framed as martyrdom, became the perfect ideological fuel to turbocharge this already incredibly well-oiled machine.
So, to put it simply, the powerful financial engine was already running at full throttle.
And the martyrdom narrative just provided the organizational jet fuel.
Yeah.
Liftoff. Hashtag tag outro. Final thought for the listener.
Okay, this deep dive, we hope, has armed you with the analytical tools to see beyond just the headlines, to really analyze what was a complex American turning point. Now, we want your final analysis. You're the sharpest detectives in the KaiZen community.
Yeah, what stood out most?
What aspect of this deep dive do you think was the most significant for the future of American political debate? Was it the political crackdown, maybe best exemplified by that Jimmy Kimmel suspension and the FCC threat? Or was it Erica Kirk's powerful message of forgiveness, a message that so many seem to immediately try and ignore or override?
Which holds more weight going forward?
Let us know right now in the comments. Just write N if you think the political crackdown, narrative control, negative pressure, was the most significant aftermath. Or write Y if you believe Erica Kirk's message of forgiveness, say yes to forgiveness, holds the most enduring power or lesson, N or Y. Let us know.
It's a tough choice, because the assassination of Charlie Kirk, it wasn't just a tragic individual event, was it? It became this seismic political moment. It laid bare these deep, frankly dangerous fissures in the American body politic. Fissures concerning free speech, the weaponization of faith, and the real price of escalating political antagonism.
Yeah.
The evidence, drawn straight from the sources we examined, shows us that powerful political actors are willing, almost eager, to immediately leverage tragedy, to use it to attempt to dismantle the very foundations of democratic exchange, like free speech and open debate.
And the sources reveal this incredibly stark contrast. A moment of profound personal forgiveness offered by a grieving widow rooted in her faith, contrasted sharply with an immediate orchestrated political call for vengeance, for censorship, delivered often from the very same pulpit, the very same memorial stage. So the question for you, the engaged citizen listening, remains. When the rhetoric gets this antagonistic and the organizational infrastructure behind it is so powerful, can robust political debate, the kind a healthy democracy needs, can it truly survive?
Especially when opposing sides seem so willing to erase the speech and sometimes, as we tragically saw here, even the lives of those they perceive as enemies.
And maybe one final thought. When the personal act of faith, like forgiveness, and the political act of fury become functionally indistinguishable in the public square, what meaning does civility or even faith itself truly hold in our politics? Think about that as you navigate the news this week.
Definitely food for thought.
And please don't forget to share this deep dive. Empower others with this crucial analysis. We need more people thinking critically.
Absolutely.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Okay, so this critique looks at the materials around the Charlie Kirk assassination at UVU back on September 10, 2025. It's a really dense and complex set of events, and the narrative emerging is a lot.
Welcome back to KaiZen. Yeah, it's overwhelming stuff. And the challenge here isn't just listing facts. It's about how you organize them so people can actually decode what's going on. Maybe pause right now if you have a theory brewing. Type N if you think it's mostly about security failures, or Y if you see it as political strategy. Let's just dive right into the critiques.
Right, so the first big thing we need to tackle, I think, is how the narrative feels fragmented. It seems to struggle, blurring the focus between the immediate security failures, what happened that day, and Kirk's whole political background, which is, vast and contentious.
That's the core structural problem, yeah. There's so much data, and it feels like the writer's trying to cover everything at once. You get these really intense, almost granular details about the event itself.
Which you need some of them.
Sure, like the shooter Tyler Robinson showing up in that gray Dodge Challenger, 8:29 a.m., changing clothes, the shot coming from a roof. And the really shocking part, no metal detectors. At a ticketed event for a figure like Kirky.
Exactly. But then, bam! Like you switch gears completely, and suddenly we're deep into decades of his polarizing statements, opposition to the Civil Rights Act back in '64, pushing the Great Replacement theory, that quote about gun deaths being worth it for the Second Amendment.
And the weakness there is that mix. Part crime scene report, part political obituary. It kind of dilutes everything.
both the immediate tragedy and the longer-term implications of his career. The reader's left wondering, what's the main point here? Is it about sloppy security, or is it the end result of, divisive talk? Trying to give both equal weight it doesn't quite land, creates a bit of a muddle.
So, okay, to make this stronger, a clear choice is needed, a structural decision. If the main KaiZen takeaway you want people to have is about decoding these kinds of events, then you really need to anchor the whole thing. Either anchor it tightly around the security context of that day,
Or
or anchor it around the institutional legacy, the political machine, what happens next.
Absolutely. And look how that clarifies things immediately. If you go with the security angle, you zero in on those preventable questions. The facts are there. Shooter arrives 8:29, no metal detectors for a ticketed, high-risk event. You could frame it almost entirely as administrative failure, things that standard protocols might have caught.
And that story becomes a warning, right, about how organizations handle security. Maybe less about Kirk's specific ideology. If you pick that path, you'd foreground the details about Utah Valley University, the contracts, security planning, or the lack of it, and maybe the immediate government talk about changing event safety rules.
Or the other way. If you choose the institutional legacy angle, then things like the money trail become central. That huge $1.25 million from Julie Fonselli, remember? Or that $211,000 invoice for the January 6th setup. That stuff shows the scale of the operation.
Right.
And that leads directly into how quickly the organization pivoted after his death, putting his widow, Erica Kirk, in as CEO, vowing to make his work more powerful and enduring. That becomes the story.
Yeah, that frame makes the assassination less about a specific security lapse and more about this, ongoing, well-funded political force. So the challenge for the writer, and maybe for everyone listening, is to look at their own notes and just ask, which story feels more significant here? Pick one anchor. Then all the biographical stuff like the Civil Rights Act stance, it only stays in if it directly supports that main claim about the chosen legacy or context. You've got to be pretty ruthless with the editing.
That's a great way to put it. Structure gives the information velocity. Okay, let's move to the second challenge. This one's more thematic, about the gap, the really jarring gap between the movement's rhetoric and its actions in crisis.
Yeah, this second point feels crucial for, understanding the state of things in America in 2025. The material doesn't really manage to square the movement's stated commitment to things like open dialogue and civil debate with what actually happened right after the assassination, this huge wave of political repression.
This is where the analysis needs to dig in, I think. You have Kirk's allies praising him for, advancing freedom, but the immediate response from government, from the organization, it was this massive crackdown on dissent, on critical voices. The weakness here is maybe treating the killing and the crackdown as two separate things happening side by side.
When they're linked.
Fundamentally linked, yeah. The crisis became the excuse, the lever, for the repression.
And the materials lay out the specifics pretty clearly. Vice President J.D. Vance calling for people to report uncivil speech, get people fired, thousands flagged online, and then the consequences we saw. Jimmy Kimmel Live, get suspended indefinitely after FCC threats. That MSNBC analyst fired, students in Texas expelled, even arrested, like that student at Texas State just for mocking Kirk's death online.
So to give the audience the tools, the analytical tools, you have to really isolate that tension between the stated principle, free speech, and the political opportunism playing out. You need to critique the action, the murder itself, which is horrific, separately from the critique of the reaction, which was this crackdown. This event clearly became a stress test for the First Amendment, and the analysis has to acknowledge that, has to show the political calculation behind the response.
The why behind it all. Because the narrative spun instantly by many, including President Trump, was basically left-wing radicals are the problem when it comes to political violence. And that narrative was clearly used to justify the crackdown that followed. But the source material actually gives us a really important counterpoint.
That's right. And to give that context, to really let people analyze it, the piece should just state the data clearly. Between 2022 and 2024, all 61 political killings were carried out by right-wing extremists. Putting that fact out there lets the audience see the maneuver for what it was.
A deflection.
A deflection, exactly. Using grief to push an authoritarian agenda. It takes some courage for the writer to state it that plainly, but it's necessary for a clear analysis.
And we could even sharpen it further, maybe, by looking at the disagreements within the conservative side. The notes mention some big names, like FCC Chief Brendan Carr, even Tucker Carlson, who actually opposed trying to get people fired or revoke licenses just for critical speech.
Yes, that internal dissent is gold dust for analysis. It shows it wasn't just a unified march towards suppressing speech. Some people, for whatever reason, pushed back. Analyzing why they opposed it, was it a genuine belief in free speech, or were they just worried about, setting a precedent that might bite them later? That adds real depth. If you listening agree that digging into this crackdown is key, maybe just jot down "okay" in your notes. It helps focus things.
Okay, let's shift gears again. The final theme is maybe the most emotionally charged, moving from structure and political hypocrisy to this real moral dissonance. I'm talking about Erica Kirk's public forgiveness of the killer, and how starkly that contrasts with the antagonistic political stuff said by others at the same memorial service.
That memorial service was something else. A real study in contrasts. You have Erica Kirk's statement, forgiving the killer. The materials call it a spiritual weapon beyond all human comprehension. And it is. It's raw gospel, right? Love your enemies, find peace. Incredibly powerful, very moving. But the weakness, the jarring part, is how it sits right next to President Trump saying he hates his opponents and doesn't wish them well, and other speakers calling for righteous fury, promising political war. It creates this huge disconnect, this whiplash. It makes the whole event, which felt like part religious revival, part political rally, seem deeply contradictory. And, as some sources suggest, maybe manipulative. That dissonance is precisely where the analysis needs to focus to unlock the real significance. You need to frame that juxtaposition as a kind of choice being presented about faith's role in politics today. The notes mention Kirk's shift towards Christian nationalism, right? The Seven Mountain Mandate idea.
Which, just quickly, for anyone unfamiliar, is basically the idea that Christians need to take control of 7 key areas of society, government, media, education, etc., to pave the way for Christ's return. It's inherently political.
Exactly. It's an action plan wrapped in theology. So the analysis should challenge the audience. Do the political goals being pushed, dismantling progressive groups, aiming for dominance, actually line up with that spiritual message of unconditional forgiveness from Erica? Her act feels like pure gospel. The political speeches, pure power politics. They don't sit easily together.
So, how do we give people the tools for that analysis? We need concrete examples. Maybe highlight Erica Kirk talking about the Ephesians 5 marriage, the goal of reviving the American family. Connect that spiritual language directly to her new job as TPUSA CEO, running the political machine. That shows the organizational aim.
And then, this is crucial contrast that explicitly with a different perspective from the research, like the Jewish tradition mentioned in the sources, which actually mandates hating certain evildoers, like Amalek.
Showing that forgiveness isn't the only moral response or even a universal one. It's a specific, powerful choice.
That can also be used strategically.
Exactly. By doing that, you lift the analysis beyond just, oh, wasn't that moving? And into the realm of how religious language is used to achieve political goals. You're showing the mechanics of the message. Right, the audience needs to be the decoder in the end. Okay, so we've hit 3 big areas. The need for focus when information is fragmented, that tension between free speech rhetoric and repressive actions, and the clash between spiritual forgiveness and political hate.
So to apply these KaiZen principles, first, define your angle. What's the core story you're telling? Is it campus security failure, the price of rhetoric, the co-option of grief? Pick one. Then, be tough. Cut details that don't serve that core angle. Or, if you must include them, address a contradiction directly.
Like with the forgiveness point. If you highlight Erica Kirk's words, you absolutely have to put Trump's hate comments right alongside them. Give the audience the framework to see the difference, to separate the spiritual act from the political strategy. Show how the same event fuels opposing narratives. That makes the analysis strong, logical, and relevant for a long time.
We really encourage you to keep refining your analysis. If you've sharpened your focus, tackled these structural points, feel free to submit your work back to us here at KaiZen. We'd be interested to see how you strengthen this incredibly important piece.
And if anything we talked about today resonated, if it sparked something or shifted your view, please share that with us. We want to hear your story too.
Welcome to the debate. Today we're going to tackle the really profound political and societal shockwaves following the assassination of the right-wing activist Charlie Kirk back on September 10th, 2025. The source material we're looking at shows, well, two completely opposing narratives just sprang up almost instantly. One framed Kirk's death as an attack on reasoned debate itself, really, and a call for order. But the other viewed the political response that followed as, frankly, an aggressive and unwarranted purge of political dissent. So the central question for us today is this. Does the really widespread disciplinary action and political targeting that came after Charlie Kirk's death represent a legitimate, maybe even necessary defense of American civility and democratic norms? Or was it an alarming, perhaps anti-constitutional weaponization of tragedy specifically engineered to suppress political opposition?
I'm going to argue that the response, while certainly intense, was fundamentally a justified and imperative defense of the stability of our political sphere.
And I'll be arguing that what we actually saw in the weeks after this truly tragic event, wasn't stability at all. It was an extraordinary systemic effort to silence critics. And I believe this constituted a really dangerous infringement on political dissent, thinly masked, perhaps, under the guise of restoring civility.
Right. So the assassination itself, it was immediately branded by, prominent figures like Governor Cox as an attack on the American experiment. And when the core function of democracy, which is peaceful political engagement, when that is targeted, well, a robust, decisive response isn't just appropriate, it's demanded. Kirk famously spent his life on college campuses arguing that, I quote, "When people stop talking, that's when violence happens." The painful irony, of course, is that he was killed while he was actually in a public debate, reportedly about gun violence. So the resulting political actions, I'd argue, were entirely justifiable because they were specifically designed to counteract the kind of rhetoric that had, demonstrably fostered this violent environment. We saw President Trump and his allies immediately blame, quote, "the radical left group of lunatics and hateful thought" for the killing.
Now, this justification was, I think, pragmatic. They felt they were acting to prevent further political assassinations, especially when, the immediate social media reaction featured users celebrating Kirk's death and even suggesting violence against other prominent conservative figures, posting things like, "do Trump next." That reaction alone, frankly, validated the need to enforce some pretty harsh boundaries.
Okay, I can see the argument about the necessity of protecting public figures, and that might justify certain, let's say, security measures. But I really believe that framing the political response solely as a defense mechanism, well, it misunderstands its true scope and its intent. The actions taken, they really have to be characterized as an extraordinary effort to silence criticism and dissent, far, far exceeding a proportionate reaction to a single, albeit horrific, act of violence. This wasn't fundamentally about security. I think it was about coercion. Administration officials, influential political figures, they seem to deliberately blur the line between legitimate, even sharp, critical free expression and genuine incitement to violence. And that sets a chilling and really dangerous precedent for censorship. Just look at the evidence presented. The indefinite suspension of Jimmy Kimmel Live.
After some comments Kimmel made led the FCC chairman to threaten license revocation. Now that is raw, government-backed power aimed squarely at silencing a major media critic.
And beyond the media, we saw the immediate firing or disciplinary action against numerous teachers and university employees, in institutions across Texas, Clemson, Ole Miss, not crucially for threatening violence, but merely for making what were deemed insensitive or callous online comments about Kirk's death or perhaps his political legacy. But we should pause there for a second. I understand the concern about state coercion, definitely. But doesn't the context here, the fact that these individuals were responding to a murder, in some cases by celebrating it, doesn't that shift the responsibility somewhat? towards maybe institutional conduct standards rather than absolute free speech rights in that specific charged moment?
Well, that's a distinction that I think kind of collapses when you look closely at the mechanism of enforcement. Vice President J.D. Vance explicitly, publicly called for Americans to report uncivil speech about Kirk directly to employers. Now, this resulted, according to reports, in thousands of people being flagged and subsequently disciplined or fired. And this purge happened regardless of whether the speech was genuinely violent or if it was simply critical of Kirk's often divisive history, maybe referencing, for instance, his controversial views on the Civil Rights Act or LGBTQ+ issues. When the state, through its highly influential officials, actively weaponizes private employment and corporate HR departments against speech, it's enforcing ideological compliance. It's not merely maintaining some abstract notion of civility.
Okay, let's look closer then at the foundation for that enforcement, the perceived cause of the violence itself. Your position seems to hold that the crackdown was primarily punitive, arguing that blaming the violence solely on the radical left was politically motivated. I'm not entirely convinced that political retribution is the only factor operating here, because the immediate context does suggest Kirk was targeted very specifically for his political identity and his outspoken conservative views.
I certainly acknowledge the intensity of the political animosity directed at Kirk. That's undeniable. But we have to use empirical data, I think, to assess the real landscape of danger here. While the suspect, Tyler Robinson, reportedly leaned left and seemed motivated by pro-gay and transgender rights issues, historically, if you look cumulatively over recent decades, right-wing perpetrators have committed substantially more ideologically motivated homicides in the U.S. The data cited suggests, in the period from 2022 through 2024, all 61 political killings documented were committed by right-wing extremists. So blaming the radical left exclusively, it really appears to contradict the empirical reality of political violence in this country. And that makes the subsequent, highly selective crackdown look much more like politically motivated retribution against opponents, rather than, a genuine preventative action based on broad threat assessment.
Right. I acknowledge that historical data on right-wing violence is it's an unavoidable statistic, and a serious one. But I think the core issue here isn't really who commits the most violence historically. It's about the perceived necessity of an immediate political response when a very prominent conservative figure is assassinated literally in the middle of a public debate. The crackdown was aimed, rightly or wrongly, at the perceived immediate threat to the political ecosystem, regardless of those longer-term trends. And furthermore, the source material does note speculation, though it was later described by Axios as baseless, that inscriptions found on the bullets could even reference the far-right Groyper culture. Now, this suggests that the political antagonism was perhaps coming from multiple directions, maybe even ironically from factions closer to his own ideological sphere.
This intense, almost ubiquitous political hate arguably required a strong, targeted defense against all toxic rhetoric that feeds political violence, regardless of its precise origin.
Okay, then let's really discuss the legitimacy of that targeted defense. The argument for the severity of the punitive speech crackdown seems to hinge on this idea that political opponents sought to profit from or celebrate a murder, thereby forcing institutions to act to maintain order. Governor Abbott and the Texas Tech Board of Regents publicly condemned the student who was expelled and arrested for mocking Kirk's death online, emphasizing the need for basic conduct. When a person uses a tragedy to promote hate or even hint at further violence, don't government officials and institutions have some duty to enforce basic standards of public safety and conduct? This response, therefore, you could argue, was fundamentally about curbing hate speech that fosters a culture of political violence, not simply about limiting nuanced criticism of his policies or ideas. But we have to be really careful, I think, not to confuse moral repugnance with constitutional justification. While celebrating anyone's death is obviously contemptible, the critical question remains, does that moral offense justify what legal experts and organizations like the ACLU explicitly called a response beyond McCarthyism and a significant crackdown on political speech? The sheer severity and breadth are the core problems here. The fact, as reported, that a reporter was disciplined for simply texting a congressional representative to ask if Kirk's death might prompt a rethink on gun control
That shows just how broadly and, I'd argue, recklessly the net was cast. Vice President Vance's directive didn't target actual incitement to violence. It targeted uncivil speech. That's an incredibly vague standard. And that directive directly weaponized private employment against perfectly legal, if sometimes distasteful, political expression. It systematically silenced critics of Kirk's ideology using the implied power of the state and the very real power of employers.
Well, this brings us directly into that powerful, almost jarring conflict that emerged right away. The spiritual act of forgiveness versus the political pursuit of retribution. The Christian response offered by Erica Kirk publicly forgiving the killer, Tyler Robinson, and focusing on her husband's faith and his commitment to, quote, revive the American family, that demonstrates, I think, a kind of moral high ground inherent in Kirk's movement, or at least aspired to. Her act of forgiveness, obviously separate from any legal process, aligns with Christian teachings and provided a really powerful, positive spiritual message amidst intense political tragedy and ugliness. That profound spiritual legacy arguably should define the moment, offering a stark contrast to the political vitriol we've been discussing.
That's a profoundly compelling point. Erica Kirk's message was undeniably emotionally and spiritually moving for many. However, we have to consider the context. That individual, personal Christian act of forgiveness was immediately framed and, I would argue, somewhat swallowed by overwhelming political aggression. Consider the timing described. Her message of grace was delivered almost simultaneously with President Trump making statements like, quote, "I hate my opponents and I don't want the best for them," and Vice President Vance calling for ideological purges. Her emotional act of forgiveness felt immediately co-opted or at least overshadowed by political rhetoric that promoted antagonism and the pursuit of vengeance. Reports noted the gathering felt like a mix, a spiritual revival and part political call to action, laced with, quote, fiery rhetoric against perceived political enemies.
This really suggests that the primary takeaway for the millions watching might not have been boundless forgiveness, but rather political aggression and retribution, thereby perhaps unintentionally weaponizing her faith for political ends that seemed to contradict her very message.
But even if political figures chose to emphasize antagonism on that same stage, the core, powerful message of forgiveness delivered by Erica Kirk herself, it remains a key factor. Doesn't it? She was speaking about a profound personal faith that could, in her words, enrich every part of life. It seems, well, unfair to dismiss that profound spiritual message entirely just because others chose to perhaps exploit the platform for more immediate political gain. The fact remains that Erica Kirk, in stepping up as CEO of Turning Point USA, vowed that the attempt to destroy her husband's work will become our chance to make it more powerful and enduring than ever before. That combination of personal resolve and expressed grace to find a significant part of the legacy from that moment, regardless of the surrounding political noise.
And that, I think, is precisely the tension that makes this event so critical for us to analyze. The clear spiritual high ground represented by a sincere call for forgiveness was almost instantly absorbed into a political machine that seemed dedicated to retribution and, crucially, the suppression of critical speech. And that suppression manifested tangibly in the suspensions of media figures, the firing of academics and employees. The political legacy of Kirk's tragic death, unfortunately, appears to be characterized less by the grace that perhaps he preached or that his wife expressed, and more by the establishment of a chilling new norm against political dissent, enforced through powerful institutional means.
So we've really explored two dramatically contrasting interpretations of the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination. One viewing it as a necessary, if perhaps aggressive step to defend American political life from corrosive hate and potential further violence, and the other seeing it as an alarming exercise of political power used to systematically censor political dissent.
Mm-hmm. And the evidence we've discussed clearly shows undeniable actions were taken by political allies, by corporate entities, to punish speech deemed merely uncivil or critical of Kirk. This created a severe, palpable tension with traditional notions of free expression in the United States. We absolutely have to reckon with the extraordinary measures taken against critics. Measures that, as we noted, many observers explicitly likened to McCarthyism in their sheer breadth and effect.
The assassination itself was quite rightly universally condemned as a direct attack on the very possibility of peaceful political engagement. The reaction, however heavy-handed it might seem in retrospect, was rooted in a real, immediate concern over the rapid proliferation of celebratory comments about violence and explicit threats that surfaced online almost instantly.
Ultimately, the tragic death of Charlie Kirk forced a dramatic and perhaps ongoing reckoning within the American political landscape. It forced questions about where the boundaries of civility truly lie, and perhaps more importantly, how severely political leaders are willing to test the limits of free speech protections in the name of security and maintaining order. The true legacy of this event, I suspect, may reside in the listener's ongoing determination of where exactly that line between justifiable political defense and anti-constitutional censorship was ultimately crossed.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive, powered by KaiZen. We're the channel for thinkers, the decoders who want more than just the headlines.
Exactly. And today, wow, we are tackling a really tough one. A nexus of tragedy, political power, and conspiracy theories. The assassination of Charlie Kirk. And for you, our listeners, the question that just exploded online, that immediate high-stakes question was, well, terrifyingly simple, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Was this just an isolated act, some kind of awful, contained political violence? Or was the official story maybe hiding something deeper, being used, perhaps?
That's the core of it, and that's the challenge we're taking on today. Just by tuning in, you're ready to really dig into the sources to become that master decoder for these, incredibly complex events.
Yeah.
We're going way beyond the headlines here.
Yeah.
We want to unpack the whole context, the event itself, September 10th, 2025, Utah Valley University, then the political firestorm that erupted, and that really unprecedented crackdown on dissent that followed.
And our mission here at KaiZen, it's always the same, isn't it? We don't just, swallow the narrative we're fed. We think. We look at the paper trail. We try to connect those dots. The mainstream often, skips over.
Right. So let's get into that decoder mindset right now. If you're ready to sort of dismantle this mystery with us, go ahead and hit that like button. Helps us out.
Yeah, definitely.
And hey, if you've already got a theory brewing, lone wolf, or something more organized, maybe institutional, let us know. Write 0 in the comments for the official story, 1 assume money if you're leaning towards conspiracy. We really need your input to decode this whole thing together. Okay, so to really grasp the shockwave this sent out, we first have to understand just how influential Charlie Kirk actually was. He wasn't just like a commentator. He was a machine.
That's absolutely the key context. Kirk, the right-wing activist, author, co-founder, CEO of Turning Point USA, TPUSA, he'd really positioned himself right at the center, didn't he? Like an indispensable figure in the modern conservative movement. I mean, the New York Times called him something of a kingmaker.
Yeah.
Axios said he was a driving force in Trump's campaigns. That's serious weight.
And the sheer scope of his operation, TPUSA, it was just immense. It fundamentally changed conservative outreach in America, particularly with young people. How big are we talking, footprint-wise?
Oh, it's staggering, really. As of September 2025, TPUSA was claiming a presence on 3,500 campuses, advocating conservatism nationwide.
3,500, wow.
Yeah. And crucially, this wasn't just like some grassroots thing anymore. It was financially powerful. Sources document revenue of $85 million in 2023 alone.
$85 million.
Yeah. So this is not your average college club, right? This is a highly professional, incredibly well-funded political engine aimed squarely at young Americans.
And the assassination itself, it happened at a really charged location, didn't it? It was the kickoff for his continuation series, the American Comeback Tour, Utah Valley University, UVU. And the sources give us a few details about those last moments that almost immediately became, iconic, really fuel that martyr narrative.
They do. He was apparently debating, actually, about gun violence, literally seconds before he was shot.
Wow. The irony.
Yeah. And the sources note he often did his thing under a tent right behind that famous prove me wrong table, that signature challenge. It kind of summed up his whole aggressive confrontational style. So that whole setup, him debating the very issue that led to his death, right there, it just instantly crystallized his image as this, persecuted warrior for free speech.
Okay, let's shift to the hard facts of the assassination itself. What the FBI confirmed. This wasn't random.
No, definitely not. The FBI was quick to say this looked like a, quote, targeted event. He was hit while under that tent. The shot reportedly came from a building roof, sort of upper right from where he was.
Okay.
And then another detail that kind of fueled speculation later, he was taken by a private vehicle to the hospital, not an ambulance initially, and pronounced dead there.
Right. And the alleged suspect, Tyler J. Robinson, what do the sources tell us about him and its indication of premeditation?
Well, first off, Robinson was definitely not a UVU student.
Yeah.
That was established quickly. But the security footage, that provided a really crucial piece of evidence. It interested investigators immediately, and later, the online theorists.
Later to show.
It showed him arriving on campus in a gray Dodge Challenger, pretty early, 8:29 a.m. local time. And he was wearing a maroon T-shirt, light-colored shorts, black hat.
Okay, but that wasn't what he was wearing when the shot was fired.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's the key detail. The sources indicate he changed clothes, suggests he put on a different outfit while presumably setting up on the roof, and then changed back into his original clothes when he was caught leaving the area.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of meticulous attention to disguise, to preparation, it strongly points towards premeditation, doesn't it? An attempt to avoid being spotted immediately. That detail alone is just catnip for anyone looking for signs of a more calculated, maybe organized event.
Let's talk about the alleged motive then.
Yeah.
Because it seems like a direct response to Kirk's whole ideology, which was famously polarizing.
Yeah, the motive appears explicitly ideological. A prosecutor revealed that Robinson's mother told investigators her son had become, quote, significantly more politically to the left over the past year, specifically focusing on championing pro-gay and trans rights.
Right.
And then there was that text message he reportedly sent to his partner right after the shooting. It apparently confirmed this kind of ideological rage, said he'd had enough of Kirk's specific brand of, quote, hatred.
So this makes the whole event just a tragic, violent boiling point of the culture wars.
Mm-hmm.
Kirk himself was so active in, fanning.
Mm-hmm.
And the irony, as the sources detail it, it's just crushing when you look at the weapon itself.
It is the ultimate awful irony, isn't it? Kirk was maybe one of the most aggressive proponents of, unconditional Second Amendment rights out there. He once made that statement that became infamous, arguing it was, quote, worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment.
I remember that. Chilling.
And the sources confirm the alleged shooter stole the rifle used in the assassination from his own grandfather.
Oh, my God.
So the very mechanism of his death was provided, in a way, by the kind of access to firearms he championed.
Think about that for a second, you listening at home. The political price he argued was acceptable, some gun deaths, was ultimately paid by him, with a weapon taken from family. It just instantly turned the tragedy into this potent political parable for, both sides of the gun debate, didn't it?
Absolutely. And if you're already struck by just how deep this irony runs, maybe pause right now, share this deep dive with a friend who needs this context, and remember to follow KaiZen. Yeah, we do this kind of decoding all the time.
Okay, let's unpack this really crucial second layer. The assassination hit with such immediate, immense political force, not just because of who Charlie Kirk was, but because of what he had done. And we really have to spend some time connecting his death to the January 6th controversy.
Oh, absolutely. The Jan 6th connection is essential. You really can't understand the national political reaction without it. Kirk's organization, Turning Point Action TPA, was demonstrably involved in the planning, the execution of the rallies that happened right before the Capitol attack.
Right. And when the Select Committee investigating January 6th subpoenaed him, his legal response, they became part of this whole political narrative too.
He was subpoenaed, yes, to testify about TPA's role. But he refused to answer questions about the events leading up to the attack. He invoked his Fifth Amendment right, not to incriminate himself. And the sources are explicit. The committee asked him directly, did he believe President Trump incited the violence? And his repeated, consistent refusal invoking the Fifth, it spoke volumes, didn't it? Especially when you put it next to the documented financial paper trail.
Let's follow that money then, because the financial records seem to seriously contradict Kirk's earlier public statements. Those text messages suggesting TPA wasn't really involved.
Yeah, this is where the paper trail gets, pretty damning for that initial denial. We have that earlier text message from Kirk saying, quote, nothing for Jan 6. Can call soon. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But then later documents showed TPA was heavily involved. Logistics, planning. The financial records revealed TPA paid, get this, $211,931.33 for the January 6th, quote, build out.
Wait, Over $200,000?
Yeah.
Just for infrastructure. That sounds like a primarily organizational role, not just showing up.
Exactly. And within that figure, there was a specific payment, $83,877 to a company called Chauffeur, LLC, explicitly for buses.
Buses.
Yeah. This wasn't, a few friends carpooling. This was a calculated effort to transport huge numbers of people to that rally. The sources really detail the scale of this political infrastructure investment.
And who was footing the bill for this?
The money trail leads to some big names in conservative finance. Publix heiress Julie Fancelli apparently gave Kirk's organizations $1.25 million, specifically earmarked, sources say, to fund those buses and the rally logistics.
$1.25 million.
Yeah. And TPA also used its funds to pay Kimberly Guilfoyle $60,000 just to speak at the rally. So, if you're an operative spending over $200,000 on logistics and facilitating that kind of funding, you're not just passively attending, are you? You're helping direct the mobilization.
The political significance of this,
Yeah.
this pre-existing legal cloud, you just can't overstate it. When Kirk was assassinated, he wasn't just an activist. He was a political operative already under the shadow of a major congressional investigation about, an attempted political disruption. So his death could immediately be framed by his allies as, a political silencing, regardless of the shooter's actual alleged motive.
And what's fascinating analytically is how those legal issues suddenly morphed into proof of political martyrdom, right?
Yeah.
If you connect the dots, the J6 documents kind of provided the necessary backstory, the prehistory, to frame his death as the ultimate sacrifice for the movement he represented.
This whole mobilization ecosystem, though, it was fueled by rhetoric, too. Let's shift to analyzing Kirk's public stances. Really polarizing stuff. The very foundation, maybe, of the anger that allegedly fueled the assassination. And we need to be impartial here, just summarize what the sources say.
Right. And the sources, they paint a picture of a man who really mastered the art of ideological confrontation. His views were often presented as non-negotiable, intentionally provocative.
Like his stance on abortion.
Exactly. Total opposition, no exceptions. Even when he publicly debated that awful scenario of a 10-year-old rape victim, he argued against making exceptions.
He wasn't just conservative. He was really a leader in that sort of Christian nationalist vein, wasn't he? Opposing some foundational modern American laws and ideas.
Precisely. Beyond opposing gun control, DEI programs, LGBT rights, he was a vocal promoter of the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. That idea of a deliberate, racialized plot to undermine white populations.
Yeah, toxic stuff.
And furthermore, the sources cite his really controversial criticism of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He viewed it as like a constitutional overreach.
And critics didn't just disagree with the views, did they? They argued his style, his method, was actually designed to generate hostility, to create viral friction.
Yeah, those critiques are really illuminating. Sources cited Moira Donegan, for example. She argued his campus events weren't actually designed for reasoned debate at all. They were explicitly, quote, aggressive, unequal trolling affairs, intended to humiliate, to provoke opponents, specifically for maximum digital outrage.
Like performance art, almost.
Kind of. One source described that Jubilee Media's surrounded debate format, where Kirk was literally surrounded by opponents. It seemed designed to maximize that antagonistic vibe, specifically to create viral clips, monetizable content.
Okay, so if you were a critic, you saw a figure who wasn't really seeking common ground, but was actively, maybe being strategically, monetizing the provocation of really deep personal rage. And he was backed by massive funding and had documented involvement in highly controversial political mobilization efforts. When a tragedy like this hits someone like that, the political tinderbox is already just primed to explode.
Exactly. And if you're finding this context around Kirk's political machine, the J6 stuff, the rhetoric, as kind of shocking or maybe just eye-opening as we are, maybe write okay in the comments right now, just to show us you're connecting these dots with us.
Okay, so the moments right after the assassination, they seemed less about processing grief and more about immediate political action. This was the moment that the martyrdom machine just kicked into hyperdrive.
Yeah, you can see it instantly. Just look at the scale and the symbolism of the memorial service. It was held at State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona. That's a venue usually for the Super Bowl, right? And mega events.
Right.
But the truly stunning detail, the one analysts really seized on, was the classification by the Department of Homeland Security, DHS.
Okay, tell us why that DHS classification is such a critical point for analysis. Why does that matter so much?
Well, DHS classified the memorial as an event of, quote, the highest national significance. Now that designation, it's typically reserved only for things like the Super Bowl, maybe a presidential inauguration.
No.
It is absolutely unprecedented for the funeral of a political activist, even a very prominent one. What that classification did immediately was mobilize massive federal resources, security, intelligence, logistics, all for what was essentially a political ceremony, funded and executed with state backing.
And the optics alone. You mentioned speakers delivering tributes from behind bulletproof glass. That just reinforces the whole political narrative, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That the conservative movement is under violent attack from the left.
Absolutely. And the speeches themselves, they pretty much dropped any pretense of just mourning. They really functioned as a kind of spiritual and political revival meeting. President Trump used the stage to proclaim Kirk a martyr now for American freedom. And he promised right then and there that Kirk would posthumously receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
That Medal of Freedom, that's a huge political symbol, isn't it? It instantly cements that narrative of heroism, sacrifice, legitimizes his political legacy forever.
Totally. And other speakers, like Benny Johnson, they explicitly called it a revival, not a funeral. Stephen Miller gave this really fiery speech, asserting that the passion of Kirk supporters burns with a, quote, righteous fury. Turning Point UK immediately followed suit, too, calling him a martyr. It was the systematic, coordinated elevation, transforming a tragedy into a political weapon aimed squarely at mobilization.
But this mobilization seemed to require, like, a dual strategy. And this is where the analysis gets really complex, I think, because then you have the striking contrast of Erica Kirk's public forgiveness.
Yeah, Erica Kirk, who stepped immediately into the CEO role at TPUSA, right? She gave this incredibly powerful address, spoke about the horror, of seeing her husband's murdered body, just raw emotion.
Yet in that same speech, she chose to offer this direct public act of forgiveness towards the alleged killer.
Unreservedly. Yeah. She stated, quote, "That young man, I forgive him." And that moment, it was lauded by some sources as maybe the most powerful public statement of its time. It appealed deeply to those bedrock Christian values of the movement, especially perhaps with the recently expanded TPUSA Faith Initiative in mind.
Okay. How well did the sources really detail maybe the execution of this dual strategy?
Yeah.
Was the success of TPUSA Faith directly tied to Erica's forgiveness message? Or were critics just kind of conflating the two for political reasons?
Well, the sources definitely suggest a highly calculated utility for that forgiveness message. Obviously, genuine grief was likely present, right? But the narrative of forgiveness provided the moral high ground. And it was a powerful recruitment tool, especially for that TPUSA faith mandate, which is specifically designed to, quote, recruit pastors and other church leaders and basically integrate the political movement deeper into Anglican churches.
So, okay, forgiveness was maybe the moral cover, the recruitment tool,
right?
While the fury, the righteous fury, was the mobilization engine. But let's address the criticism around the money aspect of this moment.
Right. Critics immediately started scrutinizing the sincerity of that forgiveness moment. Some labeled it potentially performative or even manipulated for the grift, as they put it. And this criticism got louder because, despite Erica Kirk's reported high net worth, critics noted a $5.6 million Scottsdale estate. A GoFundMe campaign set up for the family immediately raised millions, over $5 million, very quickly.
That contradiction is pretty jarring, isn't it? A message of radical Christian grace and forgiveness delivered while also benefiting from this huge financial mobilization. It just set up an immediate target for skepticism.
And that skepticism only intensified when you looked at the rhetoric coming from her political allies at the exact same time. Vice President Vance argued society shouldn't ignore evil for a fake kumbaya moment, really pushing back hard against the idea of simple forgiveness.
Right.
And then President Trump immediately undercut the whole concept of grace, didn't he? Saying he doesn't just disagree with opponents, he stated, quote, "I hate my opponents and I don't want the best for them."
So this strategic split, forgiveness appealing to the moral, maybe religious base, and hatred appealing to the hardcore political base. It perfectly served the organization's dual need, maybe, maintain moral standing while maximizing political outrage, and, importantly, compliance.
And that compliance, wow, it was enforced through an immediate and frankly unprecedented crackdown on political dissent, on free speech itself. If the J6 paper trail was the backstory, this crackdown was the immediate consequence of that martyrdom narrative taking hold.
You really can't overstate how severe this response was. Vance, while he was guest hosting Kirk's own podcast, literally encouraged Americans to report uncivil speech about Kirk to employers, explicitly demanding people be fired. That's basically an invitation for a corporate institutional purge.
And the Trump administration was right there with him, using the actual machinery of the state. Trump himself threatened to crack down on liberal groups, like the Open Society Foundations, even suggested they could be arbitrarily labeled terrorist organizations. And he issued these direct threats to broadcasters who dared to criticize him too strongly, suggesting he might revoke their broadcast licenses.
Okay, let's pause on that threat for a second.
Yeah.
The FCC broadcast licenses. What's the legal framework there? Why is a politically motivated threat to revoke a major network's license like the one aimed at ABC such a profound break from U.S. media tradition?
Yeah, this is a huge point, and listeners need to grasp the gravity. FCC licenses are granted based on a public interest standard. Now, the FCC can fine stations, maybe issue short-term renewals, but revoking a major network's license for political criticism, that's a catastrophic abuse of government power. It fundamentally violates the whole spirit of the First Amendment's free press clause. Just the threat itself exerts immense coercive pressure. It chills all political speech.
And that pressure, it seems, achieved its immediate goal when Jimmy Kimmel Live was suspended.
Yeah, Kimmel Show got suspended indefinitely right after he made comments about the assassination, specifically suggesting the shooter wasn't one of them, clearly referencing the Mangier political movement. FCC Chairman Brendan Carr immediately threatened ABC with license revocation, and that threat led directly, as sources say, to the show's suspension. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, put out a statement calling the whole thing beyond McCarthyism.
Wow. And the sources confirmed this crackdown wasn't just limited to high-profile media figures, right?
Yeah.
It went deep into institutions all across the country. Secretary of State Marco Rubio even announced that non-citizens who, celebrated Kirk's death online would be immediately deported.
It was institutional retaliation at every level. Academia, K-12 education. The consequences were immediate and widespread. Hundreds of professors were doxxed through that professor watch list. 2 Texas school districts fired 2 teachers, just boom, gone.
Fired.
And critically, nearly 300 Texas teachers were placed under investigation simply for their private social media posts.
300 teachers under investigation.
Yeah.
What kind of posts were even triggering these kinds of actions? Firings, investigations?
Well, the posts varied, obviously. But the common thread seemed to be perceived disrespect or mocking Kirk's death. For instance, Clemson University fired an employee and suspended several professors for posts that were deemed celebratory or, dismissive of the assassination. It really demonstrated that criticizing the official narrative, even maybe lightly or sarcastically, would be met with state and institutional force, designed to just crush dissent.
Even students faced really extreme punishments. That sends a terrifying message about the limits of political expression on college campuses, doesn't it?
Absolutely. A Texas Tech student was expelled and arrested for misdemeanor assault after getting into an argument with a pro-Kirk student. And a Texas State student was expelled after a video surfaced showing him kind of mocking Kirk's death, mimicking the shooting. This goes way beyond typical university discipline. It signaled pretty clearly the end of tolerance for any anti-Kirk sentiment.
And let's not forget, federal employees got caught up in this too. A Secret Service agent, Anthony Powell, put on leave, security clearance revoked, for a negative Facebook post about Kirk, and MSNBC analyst Matthew Dowd. Fired after simply appraising Kirk as one of the most divisive figures in modern U.S. politics, which arguably was just a statement of fact for many people.
The crackdown was total, it was swift, and it seemed designed to establish a new normal. When a political figure declared a martyr is involved, criticism isn't just political speech anymore. It's grounds for professional ruin, maybe even legal trouble. That's really the biggest takeaway from this whole aftermath section, I think. And if you're shocked by the speed and just the sheer breadth of this crackdown, maybe write ICIT in the comments right now. Let us know.
Okay, so given everything we've just discussed, the gravity of the political reaction, that unprecedented DHS classification, the FCC threats, the mass firings, is absolutely no surprise, is it, that viral skepticism just took off immediately. People started asking, why this huge rush to weaponize the tragedy if the official story was straightforward?
Yeah, the intense media focus combined with that heavy-handed political reaction, it just immediately created this public hunger for deeper answers. Online, skepticism just flourished. Videos questioning the official account got millions of views. globally, it really points to a profound lack of trust, doesn't it, in the institutions that were providing the narrative.
What were the specific questions really driving this online frenzy? What were people latching onto?
Well, a lot of the speculation seemed to center heavily on transparency or the lack of it. We saw those source-provided YouTube titles that went viral, like, did Charlie Kirk have an autopsy or not? Conflicting reports surface. And then the more aggressive ones, all caps, they just admitted it. No autopsy. Charlie Kirk's body was evidence. What are they hiding? That perceived lack of clarity around just standard investigative procedures like an autopsy immediately fed the idea that maybe facts were being managed to support that martyrdom narrative.
Okay, this is where we bring in the KaiZen critical thinking toolkit. Because in moments exactly like these, where facts get muddy, narratives get manipulated, you really need tools to cut through all that noise. We've got 3 simple, kind of evergreen tools for you, the decoder.
Yeah, think of these as your sort of Sherlock Holmes kit for analyzing these big political crises. Ready?
Let's do it. Tool 1, follow the money. Always analyze the incentives.
Right. We touched on the financial aspect earlier, but let's really apply the tool now. Ask yourself, who benefited financially and maybe organizationally from the immediate aftermath? Erica Kirk, who sources say already had significant means, received millions in public donations via that GoFundMe. This forced critics, and really anyone analyzing it, to consider how that immediate flood of capital created, perhaps, an incentive to maintain and even amplify the high-stakes martyr narrative.
Yeah, I mean, when tragedy turns into a massive fundraising opportunity, the narrative is rarely just pure grief, is it? It transforms that tragedy into lasting political and organizational power.
Yeah.
In this case for TPUSA, now led by Erica Kirk. So this tool forces you to ask, did the narrative maybe shift or solidify because the GoFundMe hit $5 million?
It's a fair question to ask. Okay, tool 2. Analyze the contradictions. Look for the narrative split.
Right. We decoded that split messaging already. Erica's Christian forgiveness message on one hand versus Trump and Vance's call for righteous fury on the other. Why were both messages seemingly essential at the same time? Do the sources give us the mechanism behind that?
The mechanism seems to be precision targeting of different parts of the base. Forgiveness was arguably the necessary appeal for the evangelical base, right? That TPUSA faith recruitment driver we talked about. It provided that moral, spiritual anchor. But retaliation and fury, that was essential to mobilize the hard-right political base, to justify the immediate political crackdown, and, crucially, to eliminate dissent. So both were arguably calculated strategies working in tandem to maximize organizational growth and consolidate power, while also silencing any institutional opposition.
So the takeaway is, if the narrative seems contradictory, apply this tool. The contradiction probably serves 2 different but equally important political goals.
Exactly. Okay, tool 3, contextualize the sources. Remember the evergreen principle.
This tool helps us understand why these questions, these theories, persist long after the initial news cycle burns out. The skepticism around Kirk's death, the doubts about the lone gunman theory, the questions about evidence handling it taps into much deeper, much more persistent anxieties in the U.S. about government and institutional integrity.
Precisely. We see this pattern with basically every major political assassination in U.S. history, don't we? The sources specifically mentioned the ongoing discussion around the JFK assassination records, for instance. The public suspicion that followed Kirk's death really mirrors that historical skepticism. It just bubbles up anytime a major political figure is removed violently from the scene.
Did the sources suggest that the lack of transparency around Kirk's death was maybe deliberately mimicking historical patterns? Or was it just an unfortunate parallel that skeptics seized on?
It was mostly presented as a parallel, but one that was immediately and maybe predictably exploited by skeptics. The fact that the initial official statements were followed so quickly by such immense political action, it just made the public predisposed to believe that maybe information was being manipulated.
Right.
These events become evergreen, as you said, because they allow people to project their existing, maybe systemic distrust onto the situation, especially when there's a lack of clear, transparent institutional action. The official story is rarely ever enough when the stakes feel like they involve the political future of the entire nation.
So the ultimate lesson here for you, the decoder listening, is this. When a political event sparks this level of national fervor, the very first narrative you get is, itself, a political document. You have to constantly ask, who benefits most from that narrative? And maybe most importantly, what fundamental freedoms, like freedom of speech, as we saw crushed in the crackdown, are being sacrificed in service of that narrative.
Well said. And if applying these decoding tools, these 3 tools, gave you even just a small aha moment, maybe write Y for yes in the comments right now. Let us know it's helpful. Okay, so let's try and synthesize the core tension we've really decoded here today. Charlie Kirk's assassination was, without doubt, a personal tragedy, but it was one that his allies immediately and very effectively transformed into this high-octane political weapon.
Yeah. On one side, his death was leveraged to push this truly unprecedented political crackdown on free speech. We saw FCC threats, mass firings of teachers, professors, even the suspension of a major TV show, and all of it was justified by this rhetoric demanding righteous fury, the elimination of dissent.
And then on the other side, his organization leveraged the ultimate Christian value, forgiveness, to promote faith-based resilience, while simultaneously expanding TPUSA's organizational reach, especially into churches through TPUSA Faith. And let's not forget, successfully monetizing the outrage through massive fundraising. It really was, from a strategic perspective, a flawless execution of a dual-track strategy.
The sources really suggest his life, and maybe even more so his death, intensify that fundamental debate we're still having. Can American democracy actually withstand political figures who actively seek to silence criticism and who monetize outrage? So the question we want to leave you with, the KaiZen thinker listening, is this. What do you think will be the long-term, the lasting impact of this immediate, widespread crackdown on political discourse on fundamental free speech in the U.S.?
It's a heavy question, and we genuinely appreciate your commitment to sticking with us for this kind of thoughtful analysis, for embracing that Kaizen spirit of critical thinking. Don't just passively accept the newsfeed, right? Decode it.
Absolutely. If this deep dive really gave you a better understanding of how the media response, the narrative, was strategically manipulated, write N for narrative in the comments. Let us know. And if you believe critical analysis is absolutely key to maintaining a free society, write Y for yes.
Yeah, do that.
And hey, don't forget to subscribe to KaiZen right now if you haven't already. And please share this conversation with a friend who loves decoding the news as much as you do.
Thanks so much for joining us on the deep dive.
Until next time, keep thinking, keep questioning. KaiZen out.